Today, we're talking about rising gasoline prices and why this is happening. We'll also see how much the renewable energy in the EV sector is impacting the oil industry, what car makers are doing about this, and how oil and gas lobbyists are reacting. So buckle up and let's get going. Have you noticed how high gas prices are these days? The regular gas retail price is averaging about $3.21 right now. That's $1 more per gallon than a year ago. In fact, this is a 7-year high in the United States. This is mainly because the price of Brent crude oil has been at an all-time high since 2014. This September, it averaged $74 a barrel. Compare that to last September, which was $34. So you can see it more than doubled. And the current high price probably won't be the limit. Analysts believe it'll average $81 for the rest of the year. But it's not impossible to see crude oil prices reach $100 a barrel in the near future. Actually, the market is actively buying options for $100 a barrel for 2022. And some buyers are shelling out $200 per barrel for this December. Overall, experts believe this trend is due to low production, supply disruption, and increased demand. But there's yet another reason it's happening behind the scenes. Let's talk about low production. Simply put, right now, not much oil is being produced in the world. Many doubt production will be restored next year to the pre-pandemic level. At the same time, we have a global energy crisis with a sharp rise in gas and coal prices. As energy demands grow, the low production won't be able to meet the demand, which means prices continue to rise. So how did this happen? In the spring of 2020, oil prices plummeted due to the pandemic. Remember, airplanes were grounded, cities were under lockdown, and there was an enormous drop in fuel demand. That's why the oil supply at that time was 20% higher than the demand. Needless to say, members of OPEC agreed to reduce their oil production by a record amount, almost 10 million barrels per day, which is about 10% of world production. This was the OPEC Plus deal. The U.S. and other countries that aren't normally part of OPEC also cut production. So all in all, this meant a reduction of some 15 million barrels per day, or more than 15% of the world's oil production. Prices quickly rose to $40 to $45 per barrel. Exporters suffered huge losses even at relatively high prices. That's because the cut in production cost them tens of billions of dollars. The first tough pandemic lockdowns helped the global economy to start recovering. So, exporters started to increase production again. They were cautious. They didn't want to restore production fully or too quickly. Otherwise, that would bring a drop in price. The pandemic is still ongoing, and if any country with a large economy, let's say China for example, were to enforce yet another new lockdown, that would mean demand will plummet again. So you can see how the situation has been quite volatile. Initially, analysts thought that even a slow increase of production by the OPEC members would make supply exceed demand for January 2022, and therefore lead to a drop in prices. They believe this because U.S. companies increased offshore oil production to pre-pandemic levels a few months ago. Before the pandemic, the U.S. production level led to an oil surplus on the world market. But this initial forecast of an excess of supply turned out to be wrong. This summer, it became clear that a huge additional demand for oil could emerge in the world in the upcoming months. For the first time in decades, the price of natural gas in Europe and Asia exceeded the price of oil in terms of energy release. So that's why analysts believe they'll see significant increase in oil demand from 750,000 to 2 million barrels per day. This summer, it also became evident that most of the OPEC Plus members couldn't increase production even to the quotas that they'd agreed upon. At the same time, oil demand was growing much faster than previously forecasted. In September 2021, the OPEC Plus members increased production faster than they initially agreed to, but they still couldn't keep up with the demand. Only Russia and Iraq are producing more oil than their quotas allow. The problem is, many of the oil exporting countries don't have enough investment to return to previous production levels. OPEC leadership denies this, of course. Some people speculate that maybe they're just not reinvesting in oil production at pre-pandemic levels since the global economy is transitioning to green energy. They point to the fact that even the largest private oil companies in the world have been investing in renewable energy in addition to future oil expansion. Recently, British Petroleum has been gambling big on a fast transition from oil to renewables. That's because all major oil players are facing lots of pressure from government regulators and investors to develop cleaner energy and divest from fossil fuels since since it's the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions that cause global warming. So BP has been gambling to transition faster than its peers. BP proposed to cut oil production by 40%, or about 1 million barrels a day. That's equal to the United Kingdom's entire daily output in 2019. In addition, BP is boosting capacity to generate electricity from renewable resources equivalent to the power made by 50 U.S. nuclear plants. Going back to rising gasoline prices, some people speculate that some oil exporting countries aren't quick to return to previous investment level in new oil production projects because of green energy. They say the current oil situation is an opportunity to transition more quickly to green energy and abandon oil. But unfortunately, it's not all that simple. The chief planner of the International Energy Agency, which is responsible for green energy transition, said that the transition could become quite messy. The IEA's new version of the Energy Transition Plan shows a noble yet ambitious goal to achieve zero greenhouse gas by 2050. This will limit climate change to 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. They believe that only the speed of transition will allow avoiding catastrophic consequences for the climate, population, and economy. Let's talk about electrification. A few years ago, Stanford economists projected that EVs will kill the global oil industry by 2030. If the world economy really starts abandoning fossil fuels at the speed that politicians are planning, then some people think we'll reach the peak of oil consumption sooner than later, which after that point, oil demand will only go down. Would it surprise you to hear that gas giants BP and Shell acquired EV charging companies? They bought them with chump change to diversify their holdings. But it just goes to show that the oil industry acknowledges the electric future. But the fact is that it'll probably take a bit longer than that before the EV uptake destroys oil demand. Frankly, EVs have a way to go before it can challenge the internal combustion engine industry and subsequently the oil industry to a significant degree. Here's why. Last year, light plug-in and fuel cell cars plus electric city buses and two-wheelers displaced some 370,000 barrels per day. Experts estimate that number will grow to 1.5 million barrels per day by 2025. That's 400%. You might think that sounds like an insanely huge number. The fact is, that would be just 1.4% of the world's total oil demand. So it's just a tiny dent. And that's why oil investors aren't losing sleep over it yet. Here's another interesting metric. Last year, just 2.7% of cars sold were EVs. Experts believe it'll grow to 31% by 2040. So the EV has an upward trend, and its long-term outlook is bright. But nevertheless, it's still decades away. If governments want to accelerate the EV revolution, they need to create more incentives for consumers to buy EVs and create more subsidies to speed up the infrastructure growth and battery innovations. Recently, Biden administration has proposed investing heavily on EV infrastructure. The UK previously had plans to ban sales of gasoline and diesel cars after 2040. But last year, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced they're moving up the deadline to 2030. Just consider what major car companies are doing right now. General Motors pledged to focus on electric cars and be fully electric by 2035. Jaguar plans for their cars to be fully battery electric by 2030. Land Rover projects their cars to be 60% BEV by that time. Ford announced that all their cars in Europe will be EV by 2026. This fuels a lot of hope for the EV sector. Every revolution and every war is about chaos. And that's what we're seeing. Advances are being made on both sides. It's hard to discern what the real turning point will be and when. You have people with differing views and projects. And the only common thing we share is just knowing the storm is brewing. Let's talk about how the oil and gas lobbyists are reacting. So the U.S. Senate passed a budget resolution in August for a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation package. But then there's the American Petroleum Institute. And you also have the American Gas Association. They're two of the most powerful oil and gas lobbies in America. Since that budget resolution, API and AGA have been flooding Facebook with targeted ads that oppose climate initiatives. API alone sent $423,000 on Facebook ads, and these ads have been viewed some 21 million times. Their average ad spend is a bit shy of $11,000 a day, which of course is peanut money for them. AGA has been spending too. They spent $18,000 on Facebook ads with the goal of moving people to contact their members of Congress and vote no to higher energy costs and against the energy tax. Whatever the case and however things turn out, one thing is for sure as far as the car world's concerned, EVs first died out in the early 1900s. It reemerged in the 1970s, only to fade out again. America just wasn't ready for it 30 to 40 years ago, but then it re-entered mainstream America in the 21st century. And this time, it's not going to fizz out and die again. This time, it has a foothold, and it's here to stay. But now you tell me, how high do you think gasoline prices will reach before EV takes over, and when? If you like this episode, please like and subscribe. Thanks for your support.